Hi, in this video we're going to go over how to add top stitching to our garments. So in this file I have my dress here and I'm going to add some detailed top stitching to different areas. So the first thing that I'll want to do is to open up my object browser and property editor and go into our top stitching tab in the object browser. It looks like this diagonal dotted line. And when I click on that, we have our default top stitch here, which currently isn't being used at all because I haven't added any top stitches yet. If I wanted to add some top stitching, I could zoom in to the area I want to add it to in our 2D window. And in our 2D toolbar, you'll see once we go into the top stitching tab, it will automatically put us in the edit top stitch tool. This is where we're going to go to edit top stitching once we've already applied it. But to apply it, we're going to go to our segment top stitching tool, which is right here below the edit top stitch. It looks like this dotted horizontal line with a segment below it. If I click on that, this works very similar to segment sewing, where I can select one segment at a time to add top stitching to. So for example, if I want to add top stitching to the bodice side of our waist seam, I would just click on that segment. And because our pattern is created with symmetric editing, it's automatically going to apply it to both sides. You can see that pink line, that shows where it's applied. And so if I zoom in the 3D window, we can see that top stitching applied too. So let's say I also wanted to add top stitching to my neckline, maybe on the bodice side. I could click there and that is applied. And then maybe I also want it applied to the hem of my dress too. I can click on one of those and it becomes applied. I can also go in and edit my top stitching too, which we'll do in just a second. But some other types of top stitching we have are, if I hold down my segment top stitching button, we also have free top stitch and seam line top stitch. So free top stitch works similar to free sewing. So maybe, for example, I wanted the top stitching to be sewn across multiple segments. For example, the armhole here. I could zoom in the 2D window and click to begin my top stitching, hover across that line, and click when I'm done. And it becomes applied there. The same technique we use for free sewing. And then we have seam line top stitch, which will apply top stitching across a seam line. This might be something I may want to use at the neckline, but I already applied the regular top stitching here. So if I wanted to go in and change it, I could always go to our edit top stitching tool in our 2D toolbar, click on that top stitching, click delete on my keyboard, and it's removed. And then I could go back to the seam line top stitching tool and use this same technique that works with free sewing, but you'll see it's kind of hovering over both parts of the seam when I hover over this the edge of the pattern. So how to use this, I'm just going to click to start, hover down that seam line, and click where I want that top stitching to end. And then it becomes applied, but when I zoom in, you'll see it applied to both parts of the seam, so both sides of it. That's another technique that we can use. And so then going into more customization of our top stitching, maybe we wanted to change the colors of these top stitching or even make them different colors. We could always go into our object browser and then in our property editor, clicking on the default top stitch to select every top stitch that's being used under the default, which is everything right now. I can scroll down and change some details about this. So I could adjust the thread thickness if I wanted it to be more visible, or the stitch length if I wanted them to be more spread out. I can also adjust the color, so if I wanted them to match the garment. I could choose that color, or if I wanted them to be contrasting, I could choose a different color too. Maybe I wanted them to be similar but a little bit darker to stand out a little bit. And for now, I'm just going to make it a contrasting color so that we can see what I'm doing better. We can also adjust the opacity, so maybe you don't want them to be super visible, but just subtle details. And a couple more settings in here that we're able to adjust. We can also adjust at the top the offset of our top stitch, and that is how far it is offset from the seam we applied it to. So right now it's 1/16 of an inch, but if I wanted it to be further away, maybe 1/2 an inch, I could select 1/2 an inch, and now it's 1/2 an inch from that seam. I can also say if I want it to be 1 or 2 or all the way to 5 rows of stitches, so maybe I want it to be 2 rows of stitches. I can click on that, and that adjusts it. Once I add more than 1 row of stitches, I can adjust them individually. So if I wanted them to be the same, they will automatically be the same, but I can always check the box, use same specifications. But if I want them to be different, once I add the stitch count here, I get some tabs listed right here, and I can go into one of the tabs to adjust this one individually. So for example, if I wanted one of my rows of stitches to be a different color, then I can adjust it that way too. And so right now this is adjusting it for all of my top stitching because they are all the same default top stitch that I'm using them in. But maybe this is the top stitch that I actually wanted for the hem, a little bit further from the hem and then the double stitch. But maybe I wanted this one at the waist to be how it was at the beginning. So for this example, I could either add a whole new top stitch, or I could copy my existing top stitch. If I use the copy technique, then I would need to go in and customize the top stitch to be what I wanted. Or if I add another top stitch, then it will automatically come in the default settings. So I can do whichever method I think is more similar to the top stitch I'll end up wanting. So I'm just going to add one because I want this to be a single top stitch closer to the seam line, which will be more similar to the default than what we've customized. And now we need to apply this waist top stitching to our waist top stitch that I just added. So I'm going to make sure I'm in the edit top stitching tool, click on this top stitch at the waist, and click the assign button next to our new top stitch. And now you can see that top stitch at the waist has moved back to the default, and the one at the hem is the same as our customized version. So then I could go in, select this new top stitch, and continue making edits to it if I wanted. Maybe I wanted this one to be a different color. And I could rename it by double clicking on the name to keep track of them. And I could do the same thing for our neckline top stitching, since now it is also 1/2 an inch from the seam I applied it to. Maybe that's not what I wanted. So I can make it the same as our waist top stitching by assigning it. Or I could add in a whole new top stitch for it to have its own. And so that's how we can apply different types of top stitching to our garment. This can help your garment look more realistic when we go to render, and also make it more accurate for construction details too.